So I'm incredibly excited to be here with Doug Thomson today. Doug is a director of engineering at ClearBank. A little bit about ClearBank. ClearBank is actually the first new clearinghouse in the UK in over 250 years. So ClearBank, essentially what they do is they create a set of simple APIs that banks and financial service people can use without having to deal with traditional banking infrastructure. And not only are they the first new clearinghouse, they're also the fastest growing. Last year, income increased 91% and transaction volumes increased 54%. And currently, this year, ClearBank processes 108 million transactions a year. So Doug, as the director of engineering, has been tasked with automating as much of the manual work associated with this effort as possible. Doug, I'll let you comment before we get into it.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Tim. Just want to say I'm really pleased to have been invited to talk about our experiences at ClearBank. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So across all companies we talk to today, there seems to be a single mantra that everybody is following, which is this idea of doing more with less. Now, ClearBank's product has been incredibly successful over the last couple of years, which has obviously created this significant operational growth. Can you talk a little bit about what this has meant for ClearBank and for yourself?
Yeah, so as you say, due to the rapid growth at ClearBank, we've had to also add people rapidly, increasing headcount as our transaction volumes increase. But we realised that we just can't continue on this trajectory. It's just not sustainable. So we needed to make our teams and processes more efficient. So we needed to enable transactional growth without the need for the linear people growth associated with it. We've got a lot of smart people, and we want them to be solving more interesting problems.
Absolutely. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are facing a similar challenge to what you guys are facing. So how do you guys approach this efficiency initiative?
So as I said, our primary focus is to scale the business, but without scaling our people. But we don't want to lose anyone. We've got a load of smart people. We want them to have the time and space to tackle the more complex and strategic problems. So rather than doing the repeatable processes, so we don't want to scale our people linearly with our transaction growth. So you have to understand where you're least efficient, gain a holistic view of the tasks that people are performing, and work out what systems your processes are traversing. So then you need to look into where the exceptions are occurring and either prevent them happening, or if that's out of your control, try to fix those exceptions earlier in your process. And similarly, process variants that are commonly encountered. If you can reduce the number of variations in a process, then you reduce that complexity. And the less complexity you have, the easier a problem is to solve. So the goal is to narrow down to a highly repeatable, easily automatable tasks. And if you have the ability to quantify the potential cost savings, it enables you to get senior buy-in for your investment. So, you might need a different structure for your immediate ROI wins versus long-term investments. That might also include the use of something like AI.
Cool. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you talked about reducing variation in the process, reducing complexity. It sounds like some of these things are kind of Lean Six Sigma methodologies. Is that an approach that you guys take to analyzing business processes?
Yeah. So before you automate a process, you've got to make it efficient. There's no point in automating something that's not efficient yet. So we're looking for low effort but high value optimizations, and we prefer a people first process improvement approach. And we're getting more people trained in the Lean Six Sigma methodology. So the idea is that each person can own a process to improve while they're learning the art of Lean Six Sigma. And from personal experience, there's just nothing like learning on the job.
Absolutely. And I believe when it comes to these transactions that you guys are processing, you actually built the core system on which these processes are operating, right? So you have the ability to, modify that system to make it more efficient?
Yeah, that's true. But not all of the systems are within our control. So we also use systems outside of our control. And that's where you may need to go back to your supplier and try to work out how you can make things more efficient.
Makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, of course, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are eager to know about task mining, but just out of curiosity, before you learned about task mining and you were trying to make these processes more efficient, can you talk a little bit about what were some of the approaches that you would take to understanding these processes?
Well, without a tool like task mining, it's actually really difficult. The only way you can really do it is by going and watching people and then seeing what they're doing. But that's not the best way of doing it. And we realized that. So last year, I was tasked with getting factual data on our processes, really getting some numbers there that we can rely on. And this time last year, I knew nothing about task mining, process mining, or communications mining. So I just started looking around, Googling how to get better data on enterprise processes, discovered something called process mining, which uses logs from ERP systems. And it's great for things like process invoicing and accounts, but with our setup, we found it unsuitable. And then we discovered task mining. So spoke to Gartner Research to understand more about the various suppliers. And because of the nature of our processes being complex, not complicated, but complex, whereby they transverse multiple systems, came to the conclusion that task mining was what we needed.
Okay, interesting. So you did take a look at process mining first, ultimately decided that task mining was a better fit. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why did you feel that process mining was not suitable for you guys?
Well, so my main goal was to get specific and accurate metrics on our processes, and how long it takes to perform a specific process. As I said earlier, time and motion studies they're just inaccurate. A watched pot never boils. People being watched will do things by the book, and when people are watched, they're less likely to take shortcuts that they know, even if it improves the process. If they're being watched, they're less likely to do something that's not within the existing documented processes. The other thing is you also need a bigger sample size than just one person. Otherwise, you might be measuring the quickest person, the slowest, or someone who's just having a bad day, or even a person with the longest or shortest tenure. So, people with the longest tenure and knowledge can cope with anomalies quicker and easier. So using a tool like Mimica gave us a sample size across a variety of skill sets and tenure. And as I said, ultimately, we need to scale our business without having to scale the supporting teams. And if you can't measure it, you can't know that you're improving it.
Yeah, so that's a phrase that we hear a lot, this idea that, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And this is something that we see a lot of our customers asking us for now is, not just mapping a process or identifying how much time is spent in the different tasks, but actually to be able to create benchmarks that, you can kind of improve on over time. But anyway, we'll get to that later. Just to circle back to the process mining, task mining thing, curious to get your thoughts on this. One thing that we hear is that with process mining, because you're at the system log level, you can't see what's happening, at the click and keystroke level. So it's great, if the process is taking place in the ERP system, for example, but in reality, the vast majority of the process is not actually taking place in the source system and actually across Excel or other various systems that are key to the process. Curious if that's something that you came across in your analysis of kind of process versus task mining.
Yeah, absolutely. They were the reasons that we chose task mining, because we do use ERP systems, but it's not for a whole process end to end. And my specific area is looking after client services rather than finance. So I think if I'd been in the finance area, then things may have been different. But working in client services, people are looking at ticketing systems, our own internal systems. We have information in spreadsheets. Some information will be via Teams, just interactions with other people trying to get information. So process mining just wasn't suited to what we needed.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you looked at process mining, you talked to Gartner, you got some sense that maybe task mining was the appropriate technology for you. So how do you go about evaluating task mining? How did you kind of set up that evaluation process to compare Mimica to other tools?
Okay, so remembering that I didn't really know anything about task mining at the time, I basically I looked at all the various suppliers, looked through what they were advertising as their features, then did more investigation into what those features actually meant. After that, started comparing the various suppliers' strengths and weaknesses. And then as I understood more, I was able to determine what features of each system were important and not important to us. And then at one point, I just realized all I need is just accurate data on our processes, because that enables us to prioritize what we want to improve first. And then during this sort of investigation stage, I was having lots of meetings with various suppliers, and Mimica offered me a free proof of concept, and thought, well, that's going to be good. But and all that was required was to install some software on our client services desktops. There was no consultancy required or anything. And then, obviously, that was just a massive seller for me, was that we could just install some software on the desktop, and people can start recording when they need to and stop. And once I knew that there was a system out there that didn't need a consultancy, my thoughts just started going into, if it needs a consultancy to get it installed, it's got to be complex. And so yeah, it was just so little effort to get Mimica implemented, made my job easy. I didn't need to create any infrastructure, which that would take time and money. And it was so little effort that I was actually intending on doing a POC with a competitor as well in parallel. But by the time we've got ready to start thinking about the implementation of that, I'd already got results from Mimica. And Mimica just gave me the information that I needed about the processes. So we made the decision.
That's great. Well, I'm glad it was such an easy experience for you, Doug. That is something that we worked really hard on. So appreciate that feedback. Okay, so you got the results out of Mimica. Presumably you found some automation opportunities out of the tool. Can you talk a little bit about that? And once you saw the results in Mimica, how did you go about prioritizing which automations to kind of focus on first?
So we were actually in a strange situation. We were already doing some automation, but we were automating our biggest, most complex processes first. But from using a tool like Mimica, what I've realized is I think you're better off taking what we call a crawl, walk, run approach. So start with something small, get used to your tool set and any difficulties you might have. And you've got to ensure that the process you're automating is mechanical and repeatable. So it's really tempting to automate those big hitting processes first. But as I said, they tend to also be the most complicated processes. And I'd say don't try to run before you can walk. Automate simple things first. And then when you're more experienced, you can then start designing more complex AI initiatives. But what you'll find is by delivering smaller items more frequently, you get what I call a compound interest effect. So delivering benefit quickly and frequently. And what you'll find is that those small 0.1, 0.2 FTE avoidances can quickly start adding up to 2 to 3 FTE avoidance, which if you're growing at the same rate as ClearBank, suddenly become 10 to 20 FTE avoidance within a few years. And finally, just getting rid of small tasks reduces context switching for people, which makes them more efficient.
Yeah, I think this is a great piece of advice. And this is something that we see over and over again. It's, the organization has a big automation initiative, there's pressure from leadership to get, automation value as quickly as possible. And so the team ends up choosing a chunky, complex project as the kind of high priority item. And it has the opposite of the intended effect, because a lot of times those projects, they're even more complex when you get into the weeds than they appear to be up front. And a lot of times that project can fail. It can, kind of kill the momentum, essentially, that you're trying to build with this automation program. And leadership can start to lose faith on the initiative. And there's so many downstream consequences that can occur. So I wholeheartedly agree with that, Doug. I think if you're on the call and you're newer to automation or really building up that competency, would strongly recommend starting with those smaller projects to build that competency up of tackling the more complex ones. So you mentioned earlier that you guys take a holistic view of your processes in order to determine what is the right improvement. And we know that automation is not always the right solution to improve a process. So can you talk a little bit about those cases when automation is not the right choice?
Yeah, so if your process is inconsistent or inefficient, and you still have to manually deal with exceptions and variants, it just becomes difficult to automate. And also if your process depends on human interaction, going and asking someone about some information and waiting for that to come back. So you have to take a step back and think about why you're doing a process in a certain way. And this is really important time to engage with your people, especially your subject matter experts who are doing the job day in, day out. The concept in Lean is eliminate, simplify, standardize, automate. So we started training people on our client services and operations team to be Lean Six Sigma process engineers, with the long-term intention that people can optimize the individual processes they work on before we even get to automation. The added benefit of that is that the more that people feel ownership of a process, the more likely they are to want to improve it, and they're going to be more engaged. So we want people to ask that question, why do we do this way?
Absolutely. And this is such an important point as well. We had a customer recently, I think is a good example of this, where we mapped out the team's work, and what we found is that 30% of their time is spent processing incorrectly submitted applications. And so if you take an automation first approach to this, you might think, okay, well, can we automate the review of the documents to determine that the application is incomplete? But actually, when you take a step back, the question you really want to be asking is, why are those applications incomplete or incorrect in the first place? And actually placing a control upstream, could be the right course of action. So tweaking something upstream rather than automating something downstream. There's so many examples of this, but curious, Doug, if there's anything that comes to mind in terms of something that you found could be eliminated or simplified rather than being automated.
Well, I think the concept of what you're talking about is what we try to do in software engineering now. We try to shift left, try to catch the problem earlier, because the earlier you solve a problem, the less of a problem it is. So yeah, in addition to our revenue growth, cost savings, there's also a huge upside by automating repetitive manual parts of a process. As I said, you empower the team to do the more high value work, which saves them from context switching and improves the employee engagement. And as I said before, if employees are engaged in what they're doing, they're more likely to want to solve these problems, and they're going to be doing better things for the company.
Absolutely. Everybody has something that they'd rather be doing with their time, right? Every team has this. So, sometimes people ask us, what's it like to, have Mimica come in and kind of analyze this work? What I always tell people is a lot of the teams that we work with are excited to bring in a tool like Mimica and help figure out how they can make their work more efficient. Every person in the company or every team in the company has something that they'd rather be doing with their time. So that's, I think, for those of you dealing with sort of change management, I think that's a great question to pose to people. And I'm curious, Doug, from your perspective, how do you create that culture of continuous improvement at ClearBank?
Good question. So, as I said, you need the engagement from people, and I don't know if you remember that there's a term marginal gains. When you're in a really bad place, you have to fix the big things, but then it gets down to a point where you're looking for these marginal gains, just small improvements. And for me, Mimica gives me a lot of those insights. So when we installed Mimica, it actually, as I said, we were already automating some things, and Mimica confirmed our assumptions. But the difference was it actually gave us more of the detail into why. And we were able to move forward with the confidence of having hard data to back our decisions. If you just ask people what they're doing, you won't capture variations or data about common problems. And if you talk to your SMEs, they tend to talk about the most annoying things to them rather than what's most impactful to the business. So with Mimica, we're able to fully capture the work our teams are doing, and we find almost immediate efficiencies, and that enables us to reprioritize for the wins that we've discussed. You know, if you've had a bad experience with something, you'll tell 10 people about it. But if you've had a good experience, you tend to only tell one person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see that, you know, having that data and being able to have a data-driven conversation can allow people to be objective about the work and kind of figure out, you know, what the best path forward is. So you talked a little bit about the insights that you got out of Mimica. Were there any surprises in the data?
For me personally,
Maybe not in the data, but just with the tool overall.
no. But for me personally, it was just some of the things that we do, or that our ops people will do, that we could make their lives so much easier. This is one of the problems with being more of a remote company. So in the past, I've worked with ops teams, and you can go to their offices and you can see everybody working. But when you're remote, you have to sort of know who's there. You have to go and arrange meetings, and then you're only sort of observing one person at a time. So Mimica, some of the surprises were just when you're looking at some of the screenshots, which have all the GDPR data and PII data redacted, just seeing how people are doing things. And there are just such small improvements to using, you know, even just Microsoft tools, different ways of working that can just make people's lives easier. So one of the big things was, yeah, getting those screenshots and being able to see exactly what people are doing and when and where they're copying data from and to, and the tools that they use and how they use them. So one thing is Microsoft Excel. Excel is a great tool. It's used for everything, and we saw it being used as a queue for something. But we realized that someone was copying data from one place to another to create that queue. So instead of them copying and pasting that data, we just got the data and created a queue in our case management system. But until we had Mimica, we didn't really see that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, we've definitely, you know, seen some pretty interesting stuff on our side as well. There's one that particularly memorable that stands out to me, where we ran it internally on some operational processes on our team, and somebody on our team was, when they wanted to remove the formatting, they didn't know the shortcut in Excel to paste without the formatting. So they were pasting it into Notepad first to strip the formatting out, and then copying it from Notepad into Excel, which I thought was a pretty good one.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that's just, yeah, where you can just help make people's lives a little bit better.
Absolutely. So I guess, you know, you might be more advanced in task mining than many of the people in the audience with us today. So, you know, what would you say to people that are considering task mining right now?
So if they have no task mining at the moment, just investigating what's out there, you mean?
Yeah, maybe, yeah, we can start there, yeah.
So work out where you think you're being inefficient. I think that's really important. And once you've worked out where you're being inefficient, try to understand what data you do have versus what data you don't have. And it's just, to me, you just have to get task mining. If you don't know your processes, if you do not know your processes inside out, you need something like task mining to give you the insights into your processes, because it will change the decisions that you make and your prioritization. So I would just say you need task mining.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think we're seeing that you know, this is the future, right? I mean, the days of standing over people's shoulders and watching them work and documenting, you know, manually what they do, it's just such an inefficient way to do things. So, you know, there's a better way now. And I guess, like, you know, final thing, I mean, before we kick it back to the audience, obviously you did choose Mimica. You know, I'm sure there were a number of other vendors that you looked at. What would you say was the biggest difference for you between Mimica and pretty much everybody else that you looked at?
The biggest single differentiator was, well, we didn't require, there's a couple, we didn't require consultancies, but the reason we didn't require consultancies is because the installation is so simple. So they're two different reasons, but they're tied together. It's simple because all you need to do is get someone to download the software and install it. And then when they're ready to start recording their processes, they click a little button down the right-hand side, click start recording, and off it goes. And at the end of the day, they click stop recording. And we didn't need consultancies. I spoke to 10, 15 different suppliers, and everyone, we would start talking about costs. There was a line item, consultancy to do this, consultancy to do this, infrastructure. And when it came to Mimica, it was, how many recorders do you want? And when do you want to install it? It just, that was it. So yeah, and because we did the free POC as well, the proof of concept, that just, I have to say, Mimica was almost too good to be true. When, you know, why is it that everybody else needs a consultancy and infrastructure to install, and this company just installs a bit of desktop software? What's wrong with it? Honestly, and yet I did the proof of concept, and just the look on my CTO's face when we went through the executive readout and looked at the data, you know, it was just like, this is what we've been looking for. So yeah, that was why we chose Mimica.
Appreciate that, Doug. So I think we're ready to go to the Q&A. Let me take a look at the questions that have come in here. I'm sure we have lots of good questions coming in from the audience. So the first one I'll get to here is, okay, here we go. So if you want to get executive buy, so the question's about executive buy-in, essentially. So you know, you're trying to do an automation, you're trying to convince, I guess, leadership that this is, you know, something that you want to automate, but leadership is kind of focused somewhere else, right? So how do you get that buy-in, I guess, around your automation initiative?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Executives are always looking to get more output and spend less money. So you have to explain your case in a way that resonates with your executives that you'll know. However, I'll say the actual answer depends on a few things. So for the processes you're looking to automate, how much cost and time data do you currently have? And then if you have that data, how accurate is that data? It's really important that you trust the numbers that you're using to make your decisions. If you've already got a task mining system, then you can use that data in conjunction with your transaction forecasts to show how much these processes will cost you if you don't automate them in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years. So it's not necessarily about the immediate saving, it's about how much you're going to be spending in a few years' time if you don't do something now. And if you don't have task mining, then honestly, do a proof of concept with Mimica. You've got nothing to lose and so many insights to gain. So do the POC in an area where you're confident the processes are repeatable, so are, you know, multiple instances of solving the same problem each time. And at the end of the POC, you'll get an executive readout that will tell you the value of your automation opportunities. Another thing to add in there is that each RPA bot, with whichever tool you go with, they can generally do the work of 2 to 3 people. They don't go for smoke breaks, and they don't suffer from context switching. And you can run them 20 hours a day. Now, some people think, well, no, surely if there's a bot, you can run it 24 hours a day because they don't get tired. But you do need to factor in some downtime for maintenance because, you know, just things change and things need maintaining.
Yeah, that's a great answer. It makes a lot of sense. And, sometimes data can play a key role in winning people over and helping them come to that decision. All right, question here from Frazier. So, so the question is about, installing the recorder, I guess, and like potential pushback around that. So within ClearBank, did you guys have any pushback around installing the recorders on people's computers, or how did you kind of message it to them?
Yeah, well, I'll have to be honest. When I first read about task mining, I thought it was Big Brother spying on me, or spying on their people. So I looked into it, and when I put the business case together, I put in there one of the concerns is people's privacy. But then the more I learned about it, the more I realised that people are in control of the recorder, so they can start and stop it. So if they're doing something personal or talking to HR, then they can just stop recording and nothing's going to get captured. And then what I do is when we're going into a team to start recording, I will actually have a session with those people and I'll run them through the business case as to why we're doing this. And I will bring up the subject of this safety with people. And, I'm not their manager. And I also talk to their manager beforehand to say, this is not a performance management tool. This is a process management tool. We do not care about the people as individuals. We're not trying to look at what they're doing. What we're trying to look at is the processes. That's the data we're trying to get. So when I present to the teams, I always go through this and I'm open about it, saying, yeah, it does look like it's kind of spying on us, but I can promise you it's not a performance management tool. This tool is all about process management. And yes, and once you talk to them about it and show them they can start and stop recording and show them the results from previous recordings, people tend to start relaxing a bit more and trusting it.
Yeah, so critical. And even within the tool, you'll see that the views that we show in the tool are very process related, right? They're really aggregate views of how people are working. And in some cases, even in the German market, you can simply anonymize the names of the individual so that no reporting can be traced back to an individual. So really critical, I think what you said there, Doug. It's not a performance management tool, it's a process management tool, which I think rings very true. Another question from Mohan. So the question is really around process mining and task mining. Now there's this idea that the two can actually play together so that you initially understand your process with process mining and then kind of fill in the gaps with task mining. Can you talk to your experience, Doug, in terms of like, is that how you work? Do you do process mining first and then task mining, or how do you kind of work with the two tools?
No, so in my area in client services, process mining just isn't suitable. We're going across our own internal logs, which have our own kind of logging format. We're going into third-party systems, and we may not have access to the logs. And we might be using Excel as well, which doesn't have timestamps. So it's basically impossible to tie up a single process across those multiple systems. So no, we don't use process mining at the moment, but I'm sure if you're in the area of sort of finance, procurement type things, I think process mining would be beneficial. If your whole process end to end is within a single ERP system, then I'm sure process mining would be valuable.
Yeah, I mean, we do believe that there are use cases where process mining is more valuable, but we're not entirely sure what they are. So no, I mean, a lot of our customers, I think, are even taking their process mining budget and putting it toward task mining, because at the end of the day, even if you have process mining, you're always going to get to the point where even if you find a bottleneck with process mining, you're going to ask why. Why does this bottleneck exist? And that's when you're going to go in and start interviewing people and whiteboarding and that sort of thing. So, Mimica's perspective is, in a lot of cases, you can just use task mining to get to the answer that you need. But actually, just to say, we do have an integration with all the process mining tools. So you can actually export Mimica directly into a process mining tool of choice. All right, question from Pascal here. In which use cases do you see the most potential at ClearBank? Now, keep in mind, Doug, is working on the operations side of the house, but maybe just if you could talk a little bit about sort of like your vision for automation at ClearBank, Doug.
So use cases with the most potential are those that occur most often, because those that occur most often are generally the shorter running processes. So things like payment queries, when something's not quite right, and we can use Mimica to understand more about what was wrong with the payment, or what a client is asking about that particular payment. So that's where I would go down. What route I would go down the most is what processes are happening most frequently, because they're the ones that you're most likely to be able to automate.
Yep, that makes a ton of sense. All right, getting flooded with questions here, which is great. Let me see if I can find one. That's a good one to ask. All right, so I guess what insights are you using to determine which tasks you want to move forward with? So obviously Mimic is giving you a lot of data. Can you talk a little bit about some of the metrics that you find valuable when you're looking into a new part of the business?
Okay. Yeah, so when we've done the mining in a particular team, Mimica identifies process names for everything that that team were doing. And when you see those names, there's also a couple of columns that are automatability and ease of deployment. So automatability is all about the data that process involves, whether it's structured data or not. And the ease of deployment is how many systems that process traverses. So the more systems a process traverses, the more difficult it's going to be to actually automate. So the first and most simple thing I do is I'll have a look and I'll just organize by automatability. And I'm looking for things that are highly automatable, because that means it's unstructured data. And then it might be that it's a lower ease of deployment because it goes across multiple systems. And then we can actually look at that process and work out, can we remove some of those systems? Is it that we're just copying data from one system to another to transfer something in a different medium to someone else? And we're looking for more simple ways of doing that. So we'll try to reduce the number of systems we traverse, and then we're just looking at what's highly automatable.
Absolutely. That sounds bang on. I can try to field a couple of these quickly here, some more technical questions. So one was, are you able to track a transaction going back and forth using the case ID? So the answer is yes, we do extract case IDs from the data. So if you have end-to-end processes that span, across multiple teams, you can trace one case across, multiple teams. And, a common use case for us with where this is relevant is in insurance. So some of our insurance customers they'll want to see all the activities associated with a single claim, even though the claim could take 4 weeks or 6 weeks of process, and there might be different individuals that are touching that claim. They want to measure how long that claim takes from end to end and what are all the activities associated with it, and that is something that we can do. Another question that came in here: what happens when the process flows between internal and external stakeholders? Is the internal side of things all that gets mapped? So we show a view that consolidates everything that is recorded. So if you wanted to see what's happening with the external stakeholders, you would have to put recorders on their computers as well. Now, one example of this is we have many customers who may have a BPO provider, so like a WNS or an IBM or something that's doing part of the process. So you have part of the process that's taking place, internally within the four walls of the company, and then you have part of the process that's happening, with the BPO provider. And so it's very common in those cases for us to record both parties. So we'll put a recorder on the internal people's computers. We'll put a recorder on the BPO providers, computers, and even though they're accessing the process with Citrix, for example, they can still sort of, we can stitch those two things together. So in a single process map, you would see, kind of both sides of the house represented in one consolidated view. All right, let me see if I can find one for Doug here. Oh man, there's so many questions. Love that you guys are piling these on. This is great engagement. Okay, so how does Mimica help you determine what the right, I guess, technology is to actually automate a particular process? Is there anything in the metrics that Mimica provides that can indicate maybe that this is like a vanilla RPA type of solution versus if there's more semi-structured or unstructured data in the process and some more advanced technology might be required?
So yeah, most companies tend to have particular, they have many different types of nails and certain hammers. We've got certain ways of automating things. So we just look for what we find in Mimica and what tool that will fit. So some things might fit something like Microsoft Power Automate. It might be but you don't have to automate the whole process. Sometimes you might just want to automate a part of the process. So when you're in Mimica, you can actually look at all the transactions and you can change the color to show automatability. So you can see common sections across a process that are highly automatable. So that's an area where we might look in and just look for a little bit of Power Automate to automate something. But generally, Mimica doesn't tell us what technology we can use, but it helps us to decide what would be the right technology for what part of the process.
Correct. Yeah, it makes sense. And different companies will have different tools in their toolkit. And speaking of kind of the uniqueness of a company, there's a question here about POCs, basically, kind of scoping out a POC. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, what your strategy was around that in terms of finding a use case for a POC to evaluate task mining tools?
Yeah, so it can be a bit difficult when you haven't got the data to tell you where you need to go and look. You've got to look for an area that your gut tells you, or you just kind of know is not efficient, but you then need data to better understand it and articulate the problem. So I actually put together a business case for why we needed task mining, and that covered things like our lack of accurate forecasting, needing to identify the easily automatable processes, the need for removing wastage in our organization due to inefficient processes, and how, if we do all this, it can help us hit our expenditure saving targets in a year. I also put in there about the risks, as I said before, about people's personal privacy, the security side of things with the data and PII, and also how we mitigated that. And also included in there the options for getting this data, process mining, as we've talked about, versus task mining versus communications mining, where you're looking at thousands of emails coming in and processing that automatically. And included in there, as I said, the challenges where that people would think that we're spying on them, so how we would mitigate that. And then really, you really need to socialize your idea with as many people as possible to get them excited about what you'll discover and how it'll help the business.
Absolutely. And, there's one thing that you mentioned to me, I don't know if it was in this conversation, it could have been just before, that in the POC, Mimica sort of validated some of the hypotheses that you had about, what the automation opportunity was in a particular area. So this is a technique that I've seen other companies use as well, is, if you use Mimica in an area that you don't know anything about, then, of course, you yourself have to come up to speed in order to validate whether the technology is doing what it says it can do. But if you use it in an area where you have some knowledge already, then, as soon as you see the results, it'll be very clear, that the tool is kind of meeting your expectations. So just an interesting pattern I noticed there in what you did, Doug, and what we see from others. We had one question come in. So this question is about recording people that are working on different systems. So do you have any cases, Doug, where, I mean, I'm sure you do, because probably almost all the people that you record are using multiple systems, but can you just talk about maybe your experience with Mimica showing process maps that cut across different systems and trace the work regardless of what system the work is being done in?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, we chose task mining because all of our processes do go across multiple systems. So it can be a desktop system, web-based application, Teams. It can be a third-party SaaS provider system as well. And Mimica uses screen recognition technology, so it can record, and it can, sorry, computer vision technology, and it can record all the clicks that you're doing, keystrokes that you're sending. So we can see what people are doing across these different systems. So we've actually taken some of the data and given it to our data scientists to try to analyze where people are doing one action, and then the next action is something similar but in a different system. So you can export the data, the transaction data from Mimica, and then you can import it into your own areas for your own learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify, I guess, like when you see the Mimica process map, I mean, yeah, you would see many different systems in the steps.
So long as it was on the monitor of the person or one of the monitors that they're recording, then yeah, Mimica will capture it.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, I think we've actually managed to get through a lot of these. Maybe last one here. There's a question about scale. So I know, Doug, you know, I think your deployments are, you know, given the size of the company, more modest deployments. You know, we have some customers like Liberty Mutual, for example. You know, there might be hundreds of people or thousands of people that are kind of in play. Have you seen anything from Mimica that suggests that it wouldn't be able to handle, you know, that type of scale?
No, we haven't seen any problems at all. So as I said, people just install the software, record in the morning, and then stop recording at night. The only problem we ever had was it wasn't a problem caused by Mimica. It was our own security. We'd prevented some downloads from certain areas because we got concerned about AI, and so we blocked people from using anything with an extension of .ai. So suddenly we couldn't access Mimica, but we were able to resolve that very quickly and just get an exception put in to the proxy.
Absolutely. All right, we had one float in from George here. George, so how many studies, you know, Mimica projects do you envision yourself doing concurrently?
So me personally, you know, we're quite a small company, and it's mainly me that's been driving this. So and this is just a part of my job. So for me, it's only one or two departments at a time. I couldn't manage more, but it depends on how many people you've got managing the whole sort of transformation process. So, but for me, I would only record one or two places at a time, because we then don't, if we recorded more, we don't have the resource to then do anything more about it. So there's no point in collecting this data if we're not going to be able to use it. And it's much better to collect the data nearer the time that you're actually going to use it.
Yeah, and you know, I sort of, that's a pattern that I see now. Typically with larger organizations, you might have more teams that are using Mimica concurrently, and they're each improving processes in different parts of the business. But you know, one team, they might be doing sort of, you know, a couple of studies concurrently, 2 to 3 studies concurrently. It's just that a lot of times these companies have many transformation teams, so that number can scale up pretty quickly. All right, well, yeah, thank you so much for your time, Doug. You know, I know you had a lot of great things to say here. I'm sure the audience really appreciated it. I want to give a big thank you to everybody that joined us today. If there are any other questions that come up, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. You can send an email to, send it to me or send it to info@mimica.ai. We'd love to get back to you. But again, just thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. And we will see you all at the next one. Have a great day, everybody.